Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. You have joined Intentional Conversations podcast, and this is where we intersect all types of conversations, but primarily we focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion and how it relates to business and leadership. And we're so glad you're here. I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC, and thrilled to be welcoming each of you here today with us. We're super excited that you have decided to spend this hour of time with us. We don't take that lightly. And I want to shout out the NWC team who has worked tirelessly for the past 5 years to help us bring this virtual learning experience to fruition so that you can be a part of our extended community to learn with and from us and to deepen your knowledge and understanding of all things diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility, justice, all the things. And we're super excited to have you here today. If you're joining us for the first time, one of the things that we ask is that you please go to the chat and let us know where you're joining the conversation from. It is always a treat for us to see the many different geographies that are represented among our community. And so we want you to tell us where you are joining the conversation from today. While I am based in Greenville, South Carolina, that is the headquarters of NWC, today I am joining the conversation from Las Vegas. And so I am early up this morning to be with you all. And I also want to just acknowledge the fact that at NWC, we do value disability inclusion, and we have the closed caption feature that has been enabled for your benefit. So want you to make sure that you are aware of that. And if it can make your experience better, certainly lean into it. If you are with us on LinkedIn Live, we haven't forgotten about you. We know that we have many people that are part of our community by joining our podcast through the LinkedIn Live show. And if that is you, hello, welcome. We're so glad you're here. And we also encourage you to use the comment section to just address any sentiments, thoughts, reflections, questions that are coming up. And we are bringing all of that information into this Zoom chat so that we all can be connected. Once again, welcome to Intentional Conversations podcast. We hope that you will enjoy today's show. Let the conversations begin, and that is precisely what we're about to do. Again, you've joined Intentional Conversations podcast. This is our 5th year anniversary for having the Intentional Conversations platform, and we are so super excited to be able to share this milestone year and to celebrate. And we hope that you will take advantage of some of the additional opportunities that I will share with you about momentarily for how in which you can help us to just acknowledge the 5 years of bringing this community effort to the broader public so that we all can learn with and from each other. We'll be celebrating all year long. Happy Ramadan to those of you who celebrate. Want to make sure that we continue to keep that into your hearing. This is a season where a lot of the different faith-based religions will be recognizing their faith. It is also still the month of May. So while we're squeezing it towards the end, we are continuing to amplify the importance of Women's History Month. And just because I'm already putting us until May. Just because March is going to be over momentarily, that does not mean that we need to stop amplifying all of the many wonderful ways and contributions that women show up to our society. And so yay to us women during this History Month. At NWC, we do also value recognizing national observances of other types. And so it's National Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month. And so accessibility, disabilities, those are all topics that certainly are part of this broader dimension of diversities when we talk about DEI. So I want to make sure that we're recognizing that as an important aspect for us to lean into and make sure we're doing our best to stand in solidarity and support all of those with disabilities. Now, I shared with you that we're going to have some opportunities this year to really lean into the milestone 5th year anniversary of Intentional Conversations, and we're doing just that. Each quarter, we are having a special episode that will take place in the evening where we are bringing back some of our favorites who really left an impression upon our community during their time with us on a Intentional Conversations podcast. And so for this particular quarter on April 15th, to be exact, from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have John Graham that's going to be returning along with Emmanuel Kulu. And if you missed those episodes, let me tell you, you're going to want to catch this evening Intentional Conversations reunion episode on April 15th. My team will drop into the chat the link for you to register to save your spot, and we look forward to seeing you there. By way of letting you know what you have to look forward to in future years at Intentional Conversations podcast. I am getting so ahead of myself. It's not future years, it's future weeks. Future weeks. So next week, April 4th, we're going to be kicking it off with Dr. Kim McLear. She has an incredible story, a great practitioner in this space. So I want you to be able to hear from her. Make sure you mark your calendars and you plan to meet us here so that we can be a part of engaging in this intentional conversation with Dr. Kim. I also am so excited because in the month of April, we have Omri B. Johnson that's going to be joining us for a conversation. And so I hope that you will, again, mark your calendars and plan to be here on the 11th. And by the way, at any time, if you are not able to make a show live, and there are many ways in which you can catch the show. You can catch the video replay. You can also catch the podcast. We do extract the audio and make it available in podcast capacity. So my point, there's no excuses. You can always stay connected to our community. Now, it does me great pleasure because I am at the point in time of our show today where I get to introduce formally our guest co-host. And I'm super excited about having this person join us today because she has been a friend to NWC, a consultant partner. She does amazing work. And I know that you're going to find a great benefit from hearing her story, her insights today. And so one of the things that I often do if you're new here is I want to read the bio of our guest co-host. It is our way of letting you understand the accolades, the credentials, the experiences in which our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation with. And so I am going to do that at this time. Tommi Perez, meet Tommi. She is part strategist, part cultural shifter, and always ready to make the right call. A DEIB consultant with 15 years of experience in corporate industries like automotive, energy, and marketing services. Tommi helps organizations become places where everyone can thrive and actually want to come to work. How about that for a change, right? Her secret weapons, a data-driven approach, a sharp eye for systems change, and a conflict resolution superpower sharpened over 11 seasons as an NCAA Division I women's basketball referee. Yes, you heard that right. Whether she's driving transformation in the boardroom or facilitating fair play on the basketball court, Tommi is committed to proving that inclusion is the secret sauce to any team's success. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now as I normally do at this point in time, because this is an opportunity for me to bring Tommi into spotlight. There we go. And for me to be able to welcome you. We do not take it lightly when people say yes to our invitation. And although I know we've been connected even beyond the vodcast, you know, you're one of our consultant partners, we've collaborated. We are still grateful when people say yes and want to share with our broader community. And so I thank you for being here this morning. And I look forward to digging into what I know is going to be rich dialogue. What I want this community to do right now is, before I release Tommi to greet the audience in her own way, is to let's show her some love. Let's place some accolades, affirmations, encouragement, emojis, whatever it is you can find. Let's find them all and let's place them into the chat so that she can feel our appreciation for being here. And Tommi, one of the things that we do, which is tradition, is before we release our guest co-hosts to share with us things about themselves, we often ask that they dig deep and perhaps try to find something that we would not know from listening to your bio, which we've just done, or from looking at your LinkedIn profile. And you definitely can't say NCAA because I've given it away in your bio. And anytime they look up the name Tommi Perez, you're going to see something about NCAA, which is fantastic, by the way. But welcome, friends. So glad you're here. I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Nika. It's such a pleasure to be with you all. And I love your energy. I've always admired you and your work. And so I appreciate being here. One of the things I wanted to share with folks that you wouldn't necessarily see any other place, other than perhaps my Instagram, which I typically keep private. But you'd be surprised that like basketball actually isn't the sport that I spend most time playing or engaging with. It's
Do
actually
share.
pickleball. Yes, it's
Really?
it's pickleball. Yes. Do you play pickleball at all?
I do not play pickleball, but I will tell you the craze around pickleball. So first of all, pickleball, I want to say that it's had a comeback because I don't know the history of it, but I will tell you that it has grown in popularity over the most recent years, at least from my understanding. So it's
Oh,
interesting. Yeah, enlighten me a bit.
oh my goodness, I love it. I don't come from like a racket sport background. Many
Yeah,
people who come from like ping pong, tennis, right? They are
right,
so
right.
good at it and their skills transfer. So yeah, I'm just out there winging it, having a great time. I am one of the, many millions of people who have, dove headfirst into the sport, and I'm having a blast. I definitely highly recommend people, if you're looking for something to have fun and, meet people and of course, win, of course,
Yeah,
because we
yeah.
don't play sports, if we don't want to win. But yeah, it's super fun. I highly recommend taking it up if you're interested.
No, that is great. I need to learn more about it because again, I hear about it just in terms of people. I'm going to play pickleball, and a lot of communities, they are building them into their communities. They're building pickleball courts, and so when I tell you that the craze is real, maybe I need to
It's
go and
real.
try it out just so I can see if it's something that's in my lane. But I've never been like a racket kind of person that was interested in that type of thing. I mean, watching maybe, but
Same.
not playing. So anyway, the fact that you're encouraging me to learn a little bit more about it. So
Good.
before we jump in, I want you all to know how I met Tommi. And this is actually, it was a full circle moment actually when we reconnected because it was like, wait a minute, I feel like we've had a conversation before. This feels way too familiar. So you went to Furman undergrad, you played
Mhm.
basketball there. And for those of you who aren't aware, Furman University is located in the Greenville, the upstate South Carolina area, Greenville, Travelers Rest type area. And we both were at an event and we were seated at the same table. And this event was Jackie Carson was the one who was actually putting this event on, if I'm not mistaken. And
Yes.
she was the coach at the time for Furman's basketball. And the phenomenal speaker for the evening was none other than Dawn Staley, Coach Dawn Staley. And I attended University of South Carolina. So of course I'm a fan of University of South Carolina women's basketball. And I got a special invitation from Jackie Carson to attend. And we were at the same table and we were just kind of chatting it up a little bit. And then fast forward, full circle moment, years later, we were building up our roster of consultant partners that we were connecting with, and your name came up, and you were recommended to me by another associate that is a practitioner in the space. And as we were talking, I'm like, wait a minute, and we both were like. So anyway,
You
I want to
remember
bring that
her?
back full circle moment to this community so you all know how Tommi and I met. But what I want to take you and I both back to, because I feel like it's a timely conversation. I'm totally off script right now, by the way, y'all. You okay with this, Tommy? I'm totally off script. Okay.
All good.
But what I want to take us back to is, and I've heard Dawn Staley speak several times. I remember though that night was one of the, maybe the first or second time I had heard her actually speak, and I was so blown away because I was blown away at her generosity. I was blown away at her service to lifting others. I was blown away at her prowess around being strategic because she told the story of how she said, "Look, agent, sit this out. I'm going to let my lawyer kind of negotiate this for me." I mean, I'm thinking back to all of the great nuggets that she dropped. And because, again, we are in this space of March Madness and we know that Dawn Staley is just incredible, I want to see if you can recall for us some of the impressionable moments that you left with that night, or just by knowing Dawn Staley's story and her legacy and all that she's been able to accomplish. Let's just talk about that for a second.
Yeah, Nika, gosh, so much, right? It was such a rich night. It really was.
Yes.
So many good takeaways. One of the things, though, when I think about Don Staley's impact on women's basketball, on women's coaching, right, as a profession,
Yeah.
we all know the story, or maybe we know the story of her sharing a part of her net with all of the
Yes.
women, Black female coaches in the
Yes.
NCAA at the Division I level. And I don't know if you heard this part of the story that actually just happened a couple of weeks ago or a week or so ago. The head coach of Arkansas State Destiny, I forget her last name, I apologize, but she actually took Arkansas State to their first NCAA tournament. And
Mhm.
she actually brought out a piece of the net and referenced that, generosity to your point from Don. And I just think that there's such power, right, in being the first, but also making sure you're not the last. And I
Absolutely.
see that, yeah, and I see that net as being, kind of like the manifestation of the idea of I may be the first, but I won't be the last. And I think that,
Absolutely.
as an inclusive leader, if we have that mindset, I think that we're going to go a long way, not only in our individual careers, but also in helping to shape the careers of other people.
Tommy, I cannot agree more. And thank you for reminding me of that because, yeah, she tells that story a lot and she certainly told it that night. And I can feel now, I'm actually getting the chill bumps that I had that night when she shared that story. And for those of you who aren't as familiar with Dawn Staley and her story, and particularly this reference to how she took portions of the net and she wrote handwritten letters to these women. And it was to say, my win is all of our win. And I often talk about we have to protect the full turf, right? That was her way of protecting the full turf. While I may be the one that's, in the spotlight right now, that people's names my name is recognizable to people. This is also an opportunity for all of us to relish in this moment because it means something for all of us. And if I can, you can too. And that was just so impressionable. And that's how she shows up consistently. Okay. Yes, I'm biased, and I'm going to admit that on this point. I am. I think the world of Dawn Staley. And in fact, I've written about her a couple of times, but just recently I wrote about her. And so I'm going to get my team to kind of drop that article into the chat for those of you who may be interested. So I want to stay here on basketball, but we will move off of Dawn Staley, just for the moment at least. Um, but I would like for you to tell us about your background and what led you to pursue the work that you're doing now.
Yeah, so obviously, as an athlete, I play basketball at Furman, as you know. There's an inherent, kind of connectivity to basketball officiating, and in terms of the work of DEI, you know what? I think in terms of both, Nika, I would say that I said yes to opportunities that mattered to me, and that
Yeah.
felt like they were a part of who I am, right?
Hmm.
um, with officiating, right? Athlete, I've
Hmm.
always identified as an athlete, and I hope that I identify as one until my final days on earth to
Yes.
stay active and to stay engaged, right? And I think that there are some acquired identities that are hard to
Mhm.
shake for some reason.
Mhm.
And I think being an athlete is one of those. And so I found a way to stay connected to the game through officiating. And I think similarly, as a Black gay woman, I'm personally invested in the work of DEI. And not
Mhm.
just for myself, though, obviously, like because I really believe in the power of inclusion for all of us. I
Of
do
course.
believe that a rising tide lifts all boats, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of practitioners kind of find themselves personally identifying with the work, and so in both aspects, I think it's very personal to who I am. I think doing the work that you deeply care about and that touches you intimately can be both beautiful and brutal at the same time. Because when things
100%.
yeah, when things are going well and you've gotten some, really good progress going, you're like, oh, this is great. And, when things aren't going, so well, or when there is,
Mm.
significant resistance, it can feel really, really brutal. I don't know if you're familiar with Glennon Doyle. Do you know her? She's got the podcast with her wife and sister called We Can Do Hard Things. Are
Oh,
you
oh,
familiar?
yes, yes, yes. I'm familiar with the podcast, and
Yeah.
so yes,
Yeah, I love them.
yes.
Glennon actually uses a word called brutiful that I actually use in my real life. And it's, beautiful and brutal all at the
Yeah,
same time. Like that paradox really does exist.
I love
And
that.
so yeah, so
Yes,
sometimes I
I
feel like
love
this work can
that.
be brutal.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. Yeah, we can do hard things. So we're having to remind ourselves of that a lot,
Mhm.
in this present day and time, where it seems like so much is causing us to feel defeated, and even just the fast pace of the changes that are occurring is also very daunting because it feels like we can't really grieve something and get over it, or even try to solve for it
Mm.
without then being pressed with something else that is just as anxiety inducing and activates all parts of the nervous system, right? And so
It's
yeah, I definitely
real.
get with you. I hear you on that, and I love the notion of beautiful. So yes, so you said something that I thought was really resonating with me. You said I tried to align with opportunities that matter most to me. And I want to go back to really relating this to your time as an athlete, and still very much connected to, I was going to say basketball, but as you said from the beginning, now pickleball and all other ways in which you try to stay fit and you want to connect to all of the different types of sports. But Jackie Carson was a personal friend, and I so appreciated her and her leadership. And again, just to remind you all, because I've used her name a couple times today, Jackie Carson is a former coach for Furman University women's basketball team. And she was quite successful at what she did. And not only because of what she did in terms of leading the team on the court, but also off the court. The way that Jackie and I actually got connected is because she called on me multiple times to speak into the team. You know, she would always be doing and executing and planning these events for the basketball players to be exposed to things outside of basketball. All types of topics, and I always thought that that was really smart, really generous, and she always would just kind of downplay it and say, well, these girls are athletes, they do an incredible job, but I want them to also know all of the things that they have the ability to do. I want them to be prepared when they get off that court and they leave this university. And she was very adamant about that. And I can only sense that she had great impact. And so while you probably have had a lot of influencers, just because I know Jackie and I know her style and her leadership approach, and coming off of the words that you just mentioned, I like to align with opportunities that matter most to me. To think that there was some type of influence that maybe Coach Carson had on how in which you decided to really chart your pathway ahead after basketball, Furman.
Oh my goodness. You know what? It's so I loved your question, Nika, because I'm
I'm
actually
still off script, by
reflecting
the way, but that's okay, right?
a 100%, but it's totally fine. I love it. It gives me an opportunity to actually thank Jackie
Yes.
for something that maybe she doesn't even know she
Oh, I'm
did
gonna
for
have to send
me.
this to her. Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Jackie and I think she graduated several years ahead of me. And so I never had the opportunity to play for her. I think she was
Oh,
in the head coaching role, yeah, for about 13-ish years.
hey,
But that
got
was
it. So you were
several
long gone.
years.
Okay,
Yeah,
got
I
it.
was long
Got
gone.
it. Got
But
it.
but it's so interesting, Nika, because you're asking a question about her impact on me, and you didn't even know that a
Yes.
year ago, yeah, I had not to get too much into the details, but I had a thing happen, and Jackie in her new role as the I think she's associate commissioner at the ACC.
Yep. Go Jackie, by the way.
Yes, go, go Jackie. She exhibited a level of empathy
Hmm.
that I was just blown away by, honestly.
Hmm.
And when you are kind of in the depths of despair, whatever, the situation may be, whether it's a professional crisis, whether it's a personal crisis, whatever the case may be, when you have people in your corner who know who you are, who believe in who you
Right.
are, and can say, you know what, I'm there with you, hang in there, can I do
Hmm.
anything for you, I have resources, to share if you need them.
Hmm.
I'm telling you, empathy is a real skill
Oh,
that
yes.
yeah, I think as leaders, we overlook the impact. And so I encourage all of us, especially in the season that we're in today, nationally, globally, even, gosh, really sharpen the skill of empathy, because when someone needs it,
Mm,
um, you being able to be there for them is going to pay dividends. So thanks,
yeah.
Jackie. And thanks to,
Thanks, Jackie.
the empathetic leaders out there, because the impact is real.
Oh, I love that. And thank you, yes, for helping me to understand the timeline there, because I think that I definitely was anticipating that, well, I was walking away feeling like maybe the two of you had some time together during your time at Furman. And so yeah, even more of affirmation for Jackie. So I so appreciate you sharing that. And while I don't know, I think that I probably could maybe make a guess about the thing that you talked about. And
Oh, thank
and yes, I that feels so much like something that she would do. You know, it really does. Okay. Well, let's move
you.
on. Okay, let's move on. So, how was your background as an NCAA Division One women's basketball referee influence your approach to conflict resolution? Because you call that out as part of how you like to show up to this work. So, talk about that in terms of how it intersects in the corporate DEIB space that you're a practitioner for.
Yeah, so I believe his name is JD Collins. He's actually a seasoned official on the men's side. He might, forgive me, he might be the like the coordinator for the national coordinator for the men's side. I'm not sure, but anyway,
Okay.
he is a well-known men's official, and
Mhm.
he actually, I heard him one time describe our role as referees as absorbing chaos and creating calm. That's what we do,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? We absorb chaos and create calm.
Mhm.
And in the game of basketball, right? There's tons of chaos. There's players, playing hard and being competitive and giving, all they have. And there's coaches fuming on the sidelines. There's fans in the stands who are like
Yes.
literally living up to their name of fanatical. And
Yes.
it can be downright madness sometimes, for sure. Um, and I think, within the workplace, expectations, obviously the expectations of decorum are a little bit different, but there's still strong
Mhm.
emotion, right? That
Oh,
we absorb in our line of work. Absolutely. You know
right.
this for sure, right?
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, there's fear, there's frustration, there's anxiety, there's feeling of letdown, anger, all the things, right?
Hmm.
And so, being able to, absorb chaos,
Hmm.
contain it, also
Hmm.
learn to release it, right? Because we can't just keep
Right.
that stuff bottled up.
Right.
You know, yeah. And one way I like to try, emphasis on try. I try to create calm is to try to identify like underlying needs and values that are connected to what I'm seeing from someone else, right? Their feelings and their
Yeah.
actions. And so, of course,
Yeah.
on the court, players and coaches, they want to be heard, right? And I
Hmm.
truly want to understand their perspective, right? Truly, like even when I'm 100% right and they are 100% wrong,
Yes.
whether, for example, if there's a rule interpretation, it's like, you don't have that right, I promise you. Or, whatever happened during the play, whatever the case
Yeah.
may be, I still want to understand what's going on for them. Or
Yeah.
at the very least, I want to hear what they have to say. And so just like
Sure.
in the work of DEI, right, getting underneath the chaos, for example, trying to understand the underlying reasons of a manager's resistance to supporting their employees' ERG participation. It's really
Yeah.
important to try to create that sense of calm and connection with people because you're not going to
Hmm.
be able to tackle any barriers that are at
100.
play if you don't understand that. So I hope
Yeah.
that answers the
No,
question.
it does. And it's beautiful. I love really good analogies because I think that it really helps us to deepen our understanding and appreciation for the connection points there and absorb chaos and create calm. That is precisely what we do in this space every single day. So maybe we should start referring to ourselves as DEIB referees instead of like DEIB practitioners because yes.
I love that. We need
That
little
is what we
whistles.
do. Yes,
Yeah.
I know. I mean, seriously, that is exactly what we do. I feel like maybe this conference theme kind of, forming right now where we need to kind of help our practitioners in this space to think about that as their role because I think that that's so impressionable. And that is exactly what we do. We fix things. We help to uncover and unearth the values and the deeper feelings that are below the surface that people don't even think to ask about because they're not curious enough. They're just so set in how their perception is revealing the reality to them. And I can go on, and I know that you can agree with all of this, but yes. And so something to be said for absorbing chaos and creating calm. So thank you so much for that, Tommi.
Mm.
Now, I am sure that you have encountered many different perspectives in your career. We all do, right? So, how do you navigate conversations where opinions may drastically differ, especially when it comes to sensitive issues that I know that you have to navigate for clients every single day around this work of DEIB? And it's probably going to be a great segue to the absorbing chaos and creating calm conversation we just had.
For sure. Yeah. And I think part of that creating calm is being able to validate and acknowledge someone
Yeah.
else's perspective, right? Even when we don't agree, particularly when we don't agree, right? And especially in situations where there might be heightened emotion. And I also think, when having these conversations, getting clear about the motive is really important. I rarely look to agree, right? I think I instinctually want people to agree with me, or I want to agree with other people, but
Yeah.
especially in this work, we're probably not going to we're not going to arrive at agreement, at least not
Yeah.
like soon, right? And so I generally try to look for closure in encounters, right? There's an element of understanding and acceptance on both sides with respect to
Hmm.
closure. And when I'm addressing a coach, for example, who's like ripping off their jacket, I'm in disgust, and when I address them, I promise you they're not going to agree with me, even
Right.
if I'm right. So
Yeah. Body
my
language, the
goal,
ripping
yeah,
off, all of that's giving it away, right? All of that's giving it away. Okay.
absolutely. So my goal and my motive isn't going to be to change their minds, right? It's impossible in that
Yes.
space. And so trying to convince somebody who believes in the myth of meritocracy and believes, every
Yeah.
marginalized hire is a DEI hire, right? Good luck changing their minds. But one of the things that I think in those conversations, trying to achieve closure in some sense, I think is the key.
Yeah.
True story. Really quickly, I actually worked for someone who did not explicitly support LGBT folks due to their religious beliefs. And
Mm-hmm.
you never hear this person say something like love is love, love wins,
Yeah.
nothing
Yeah.
of that nature. And I was out, so it wasn't a secret that
Mm-hmm.
I was literally reporting to this person. And while they didn't disparage the community, they never explicitly espouse support or
Right.
affirm me as a person or the LGBT folks. um, as you would expect from a DEI leader. And yes, this person, was a DEI leader, and I will say
Mm-hmm.
one of the best leaders I worked for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we would have, conversations about LGBT issues. When we would have those conversations, of course, there was mutual respect, right? Of course, there was
Yes.
curiosity, and there was a
Yes.
real commitment to understand and accept one another as they are.
Yeah.
I think, those ingredients are really important. And so when
Mm-hmm.
we talked about sexuality at work, this person
Mm-hmm.
would say, "Hey, be who you are," and that was enough for me.
Yes.
And yeah, and I made a choice not to demand anything else from this person that they weren't willing to provide. And so, that said, though, there's no place for harm. There's no place for oppressive comments or opinions.
Right.
There's no place for that stuff. But there is gray. And for me,
Mm-hmm.
inside of that gray, we were able to get closure, not agreement, and continue to work together in a way that we were extremely successful. And I love this person dearly. I believe that this person loved me dearly as well. And it was a great experience.
That is, I'm pausing and I'm being careful with my words because we don't talk about this often enough. We don't talk about the fact that two truths can exist at the same time, and there are ways to effectively manage that and to coexist where still all parties can feel whole and enough. And I think that those are stories that have to be amplified. And so thank you for sharing this story. I just want to kind of pontificate on some of what's coming up for me as I was listening to you. The first is I love the connection point between the distinction of agreement and closure. I think that oftentimes the reason that division comes in when it relates to difference, any dimension of diversity that's just different maybe from our own, is because we classify it as right, wrong, good or bad, inferior, superior, instead of just different, right? And when we do that, there becomes this deep urge and passion for us to try to bring someone else along to our point of view, to our truth, without realizing that you can have your truth and you can still be valued and still dignified and still be a great contributor and still show up in spaces where you're fully authentic. And that's completely okay and welcomed. And I also can have my truth and not to have perceptions or judgments about me and how in which I look at the world. And I think that that needs to be uplifted. When you talk about agreement versus closure, to me, that closure is common ground. And you and this
That's it.
former supervisor, you were able to not only just find that common ground, but find that common ground in what it sounds like to a place of a high level of respect and reverence for just the ability for two professional individuals to do that and do that well. And that's, I don't think that that is something that we see occurring, not nearly as often as it needs to. You know, I often say that acceptance isn't agreement. And, you know, you talk about it as agreement and closure. So that common ground is I can agree that we're different. And I can also agree that that difference doesn't make me better, me right, you wrong. It's just your truth is your truth and my truth is my truth. And you know what? We can still live and create magic with harmony, right? And I think that is so important. And the most important words that someone can hear from someone that they are, especially when there's power dynamics, like in a workplace, when there
Mhm.
is clear difference, is be free to be who you are because who you are is enough. That is a gift. And I am so glad, Tommy, that that was your experience. I am so glad that that was your experience. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people who are listening in or who will hear this in the future that are like, yes, that's it. That's it. Why are we trying to get everybody to agree on everything? No, agreement is not the goal sometimes. So we make that the goal every time. Sometimes I tell people that we have to realize that behavioral change in terms of how we conduct ourselves, even if maybe our hearts and our minds haven't changed, that behavioral change is still a win. And let's count that a win. And maybe as we're operating in those behaviors that are conducive for healthy workplace cultures, then through the whatever activities that are happening thereafter, whatever influences that are happening thereafter, maybe people's hearts start to change. Maybe their minds start to change, right? And if it doesn't, okay.
Absolutely. You're preaching. Can I cash app you? I mean, I know you don't have a plate, but a virtual plate, maybe. I don't know.
And Tommy, listen, I tell people all the time that when I show up every Friday to these conversations, I am also in this listening and learning mode as well. So if I am preaching, this is not preaching to y'all. This is really preaching to myself because I deeply believe this. And
Yeah.
it's almost like one of the best questions someone has ever presented to me has been, "What do you crusade for? What do you preach for that you feel like no one is hearing?" And I feel like no
Mm,
one is hearing this. Yeah,
yeah.
no one is hearing this. Difference doesn't mean that there has to be a right or wrong or good or bad.
That's it. That's it. And,
Okay.
our culture nowadays, we've lost the art of nuance. We've got the debate culture online. We've got all these debate shows that, drive ratings, right? People love watching. I watch them
You're
for
right.
sure. The sports talk, the political talk, all the talk, right? And
Right.
we're just really atrophying our muscles around dialogue and being able to really center understanding
Yeah.
versus agreement, right, in our
Yeah.
conversation. So I think you're
Yeah.
right on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a practice. We have to upskill ourselves around that because it's not something that just comes, you know,
Mhm.
easy to our human nature. I get that. But if we care enough about humanity, then we should be willing to inconvenience ourselves or stretch ourselves for the benefit of helping to build and cultivate stronger relationships across difference. And so I love Toki's statement into the chat. Toki is a frequent supporter of our community. Thank you for being here today, Toki. But she says, acknowledge difference without judgment. Yes, without that is the key.
Love
That
that.
second half of that is what I want to amplify and lift up. Without judgment. Without
Love
judgment.
that.
Anyway, okay.
Whew.
I want to go to the next question. But before I go to the next question, I do want to let you all know that you will have a chance to join us in this conversation as well. If you're part of our LinkedIn community, then just go to the comment section and add whatever curiosities or questions that are coming up for you. We will bring that over into our chat here in Zoom, and we will present those questions as time will allow for. If you're here, a part of our Zoom community, then you can use the raise hand feature that lets me know that you're willing for me to call upon you and to invite you to unmute yourself and socialize your thoughts, comments, questions directly. And if your camera is on, I will also add you to the spotlight. So I'll let you all percolate on maybe what's coming up for you while I go to the next question. I want to talk about intentional conversations. No pun intended. Of course, this is what we're here for today. But I want to talk about the act of really allowing ourselves to have intentional, productive conversations that can lead to clarity, understanding, impact, change, all the things, right? And that's also something that we have to be upskilled in. So, from your experience, Tommi, what are some common barriers that people face when trying to have these intentional conversations that can be difficult and delicate in nature, and how can they overcome some of those barriers? Because I think that that is the key to understanding is our willingness to engage in effective productive dialogue.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, there's so many barriers, right? I can't name them all, but the first one I'll talk about is I think one of the ways that we can overcome them. And one of the reasons I don't think that we have these conversations, Nika, and I know you know this, I know folks on this call know this, it's just not safe, right? There's no psychological safety within the team, right? The risk
Mhm.
isn't worth taking, so I'm not going to take it,
Right,
right?
right.
So as a leader, if I care about this,
Hmm.
then what am I doing to create a space where risk taking is okay?
Yeah.
And I have to be able to go first, right? I have to be able to take a risk. And a lot of leaders aren't willing to take a risk because we want to be, we're paid to be the hot
Oh,
shot in the
yeah.
room with all the
We
answers. And
can't
when
show
you're,
any vulnerability. Mm-mm. No, 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 no.
yeah,
We'll be seen
right?
as weak, and yeah, no, 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 no. Mm.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I think that that's there. I mean, gosh, all the things, right? I feel like we have a right to be right. There's no black and white.
Hmm.
I mean, there's no gray. There's always black and white, kind of what we just talked about
Hmm.
earlier. I think a
Hmm.
lot of leaders aren't skilled in navigating intentional conversations. I think it takes practice in these areas, and I think that
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of role play.
Yeah.
To role play, different scenarios because we don't have them frequently enough, right? Again, if we don't use it, we'll lose it. And so, if we're not practicing these skills, then we're not going to be able to show up when game time comes, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And then, I think the final thing too is we're so practiced at that debate culture that we talked about that we lack the skill of being able to have open-ended, ongoing, co-creative dialogues with folks.
Hmm.
And, where shared learning is really the goal and connectedness is the goal, right? I think asserting ourselves is oftentimes the
Yeah.
goal, being right or searching for that agreement is oftentimes the
Yeah.
goal. And I think, being able to kind of switch a gear in our minds to
Hmm.
say, actually, it's shared learning. I have to actually humble myself a little bit. Hopefully, the folks in the room are doing the same because I think your orientation to learning has to be humility, right? So, I mean,
Yes.
the list can go on really with
All
respect
the
to
things.
different
Yeah.
barriers. Yeah,
Quietening the
for sure.
ego, demonstrating humility. And if you are a leader, I love what you said before. We have to be willing to create those safe spaces by being first to take the risk. There is certain responsibilities that come with that title of leader. And so be first, model it. And then that will give, others permission to do the same. I don't see any hands raised right now, so I'm going to keep on this thought for just a second. That's one of the reasons that here for the past 5 years on intentional conversations, we bring a diverse array of guests who share their unique perspectives around this broad topic, right? And we often will share that it's not necessarily so that all of the views and the opinions expressed by our guests or those that are reflected by our values or how we show up to this work But if this is going to be intentional conversations, our commitment is to foster kind of a growth mindset, is to foster curiosity and learning. And we believe that it's definitely essential for people to explore a wide range of ideas and approaches to DEI. I've talked recently, particularly in the last week's vodcast with Dia Kana. So for those of you who maybe didn't catch that particular vodcast, make sure you go back and listen to the podcast or watch the replay. But we talked about how there's some infighting, for the lack of a better word, that's happening right now within the practitioner space of DEI, where there are judgments about the competencies being up to par of those who are consultants versus those who work actually internally for organizations. And what I loved about where Dia and I both concluded with that dialogue is that, being in community as we are practicing this work, and allowing the level of diversity to show forth in our discipline of this work is important, because there's so many different drivers and motivators that will move people to action, and we need all of us, and we definitely
Mm.
need not to be fighting each other, because there's a bigger giant to fight right now. And so I bring that in the context of this conversation about being open to different voices and insights around these conversations, and then letting that serve as a way to fuel our own personal learning journey, and where we are going to maybe decide to pitch our tent around how we want to show up, right? And so I just
Mhm.
appreciated the opportunity to be able to reflect on some of those points that came out last week, which I think is still very relevant to today's conversation. Okay, let's talk about accountability. I find, Tommi, that one of the ways in which organizations fail to serve its people well is when they will talk. There's a lot of rhetoric around support of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they do not, for whatever reason, see it appropriate or necessary, or they're just moved to action around incorporating accountability mechanisms. And and that becomes really telling for me. So in your experience, what are some of the key elements of creating accountabilities for DEIB work within an organization, particularly around people leaders who should be aligned with certain, conduct, behaviors, values, to make sure that they are fueling a healthy workplace culture?
100%, right? DI has to be operationalized at every
Yeah.
level.
Mhm.
And it has to be clear, right, that inclusive leadership activates our company's core values. And
Yes.
so the problem is we either don't really operate within our core values,
That part.
therefore it's all lip service, and so no one's really taking it seriously, right? Or DEI is so it's left conceptual that people are like,
Yeah.
okay, I other than going to a ERG meeting, what do you want me to do, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so, yeah, so employees have to understand that there are behaviors that will grow your performance, results, and your career, right? And they need to be encouraged to exhibit these behaviors. Employees then also have to understand that there are behaviors that will detract from your performance, your
Right.
results, your careers, and they need to be discouraged from exhibiting those behaviors. It
Mhm.
feels simple, it sounds simple. I feel like
Yeah.
it is, but it's hard, right, to
Yeah.
execute. But I remember in a previous life, we were really making some really strong headway in this area because of the partnership between DEI, the Executive Diversity Council, the blockers and tacklers of the organization, the
Mhm.
decision makers of the organization, and of course talent management, right?
Yeah.
Or organizational effectiveness, whatever that group is called in your organization. Because one of the approaches I think that really has to happen is a shift in the performance management culture, right? From that 1 to 2 HR driven conversations, like the mandatory, all right, Nika, all
Yeah.
right, we got to have this 30-minute conversation and write something
Right.
up,
Right.
versus
Yeah.
the consistent, on the job
Ongoing
coaching, regular
dialogue.
comment.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think leaders really tend to manage performance, as much as they manage output, right? Maybe they don't even really manage performance as much as they really manage output. And I
Yeah.
think that distinction matters. And so being able to do both effectively, I think, is a mark of a good leader in this area.
You just said something that is ringing so true in my head, and I think it needs to be amplified. Managing to outputs versus performance. That is so true. And what I'm also finding is that because of that type of mindset, there are a lot of managers, people leaders who are in those people leader roles simply because their output demonstrated that, okay, yes, you are deserving now of a bump up. But then we totally forget about, okay, now this bump up requires this individual to now lead, manage, influence, coach, and mentor others. And have we upskilled them correctly? And so there is this imbalance around how in which we do manage how people show up in the workplace. It's not just about the output, it's also how are we getting there through building relationships, cultivating relationships, contributing to a healthy culture. And so what you just highlighted is critically important, and I do think that it is part of why so many organizations find themselves challenged with the internal conflict that exists. That is, whether they realize it or not, is impacting productivity and is
100%.
causing people to plan their exit strategies, and it's causing good people
100%.
to leave. So there's a lot to be said for that. And one other thing that you mentioned is and I love this notion, but it's about how organizations sometimes they will conceptualize this work, making it quite abstract and ambiguous instead of really getting clear about when we say we value inclusive behaviors, inclusive leadership, and just leaving it at that, but taking it the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth step to say, this is what this looks like in practice. And this is what an
Mm.
infraction will look like. And this is the type of support we're providing to make sure you can meet this goal. And if you can't meet these types of goals after we've provided that support, here are the consequences and the accountability mechanisms. We fail to see it all the way through. There are multiple
Yes.
steps to this thing. And yeah, we need to make sure that we're getting smarter about how in which we're addressing that within the workplaces. Okay, I'm
Yes.
capitalizing on
And
every moment here. Did you want to
I
share
love
something
it.
on
And
that?
just the last thing too, right? It really moves people when there is no difference in status. People who are seemingly untouchable versus the people who are always getting dinged for something, right? We
Yes.
have the different statuses, right, within our organizations, within our teams. And when we reduce those strata, right? Because there's always going to be hierarchy. There's always going to be, but
Of
status is
course.
different, you know?
Hmm.
And if someone is called in,
Hmm.
someone of a high status is called in.
Hmm.
I'm not saying, publicly embarrassed or anything like that, but when someone says, "Hey, you just did that. We don't do that here."
Hmm.
It just it means the world. And I think
Yes.
acts like that will shift a culture overnight.
Oh,
A
absolutely.
team culture overnight, you
Yeah.
know? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, how we show up in those moments means everything.
I totally agree. That's true leadership because it takes vulnerability. It takes
Courage.
and it takes courage, of course, and it feels very
Yeah.
risky. But
Yeah.
imagine if you are a person of influence in the organization by your positionality and your title, and it being a situation where you have to really dig deep and find courage to do it as a leader. Imagine someone who may not have that title and that influence connected to their position and how they experience it, right? And so there's so much to be said for setting the tone. And oftentimes people will say, well, you praise in public and then you kind of reprimand in private. And I do
Mm.
believe in that generally speaking, but I believe it's very
Mhm.
contextual. I believe it's very circumstantial. I believe that if it's happening in a very blatant way and it is witnessed by so many others, you can't let that go. I'm not saying that you
That's
have to
it.
berate the person, but you have to acknowledge it in
No,
that moment in the presence of all of those people, because otherwise, no one's
that's
knowing
it.
that you're pulling someone aside and having a private conversation with them. Otherwise, it feels like we condone this. This is okay. And it's not okay.
That's right.
It's not
That's right.
okay. No, it's not okay at all. Okay, I'm looking at the time. All righty. I'm going to go for another one. Now, this is important to me because I talk often about the difference between activity versus impact, and how
Mm,
sometimes our efforts to try to create the change transformation, particularly as it relates to DEI, is that we will try to solve for it with very programmatic activity type related initiatives. And
mhm,
we fail to go deeper into like addressing systemically what also needs to shift. And that's how I usually, talk about activity versus impact in this context. I want to understand what your practices are, Tommy, for balancing the programmatic aspects of the work with the need
yeah.
for institutional change, especially in industries that may be resistant to change. And let me add this caveat to it as well, especially in organizations where you have high performers in terms of their output who are often culprits. And again, you don't want to ruffle their feathers because you feel like you need them.
That's
How do you
real,
deal with this?
right?
That's real.
I think that that's so real. I think there's levels to it, right? So I see it being a balance between how effective we are at implementing those level one, those programmatic things, and
Hmm.
also organizational readiness. Like how ready is the organization to call folks like the high performers in, right? You might be rocking it
Yes.
out, on the spreadsheet, but as one of my former peers said, but you're leaving dead bodies behind you, right? Like, you're
Yes.
just casualty after casualty after casualty, right? And so,
Yes.
yeah, if but one of the things, the onus is on us, right, to be effective with that level one stuff, programmatic
Mm.
stuff,
Mhm,
because that
mhm,
sets us up for success to be able to
mhm.
get buy-in and support for the more impactful strategies. Basically, for the stuff that's going to require a little bit more effort, right,
Yes.
from the
Yeah,
change makers, in the
right.
organization.
It gives you evidence
But
of that quick
yeah,
kind of momentum and traction. Yes.
yeah, but if the organization isn't ready or receptive, we're not going to see much progress, at all. So I think it really
Mhm.
is a balance between effectiveness and readiness. And we kind of have to be able to understand where we are and kind of read the room in that regard. And if the organization isn't ready, or if there is entrenched resistance to, particular institutional change we're trying to drive, or we're trying to facilitate, then we have to, that's a decision point for us, right?
Mhm.
Am I okay with just kind of like the level one, level two stuff?
Right.
Or do I want to, take my talents to South Beach, as LeBron said, or, take my talents elsewhere, for people to really be partners in real change. I'll say this as a last point, Nika. You know, I think about organizations who are really at the forefront of the work, and gosh, organizations that I thought were at the forefront of the work, but then made
Yeah.
decisions to let me know, oh,
Right.
okay, I see where you
Right.
are. But I think that there's, regardless of where you are, there's always a line that, as an organization, I don't think that you're willing to cross. For
Oh,
example,
yeah.
if Ben and Jerry's, I think, is like an incredible organization, and they
Mhm.
try to live their values. I think they've got some stuff going on right now that
They're being
maybe
challenged of
has
late. They're being challenged of late. People are coming after them
yeah,
because of their deep values, though. But yeah.
exactly, right. And so their parent company, yeah, they're creating a little bit of a
Hmm.
dynamic. But at the end of the day, I've always thought to myself, but what is their line? Like, for
Yeah.
example, like if they, where they get their milk for their for their ice cream, it's made by, there's some exploitation practices there,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like stuff like that, that systemic stuff, that stuff that we're like,
Yeah.
hey, make better choices, right? Will we get some resistance? Yes, right? And that's probably going to be a long time coming to get things like that changed. So I think there's levels to it, right? And as
Okay.
practitioners, it's always kind of understanding, like, where am I okay with putting my effort, and where can I say, all right, I've had enough. This is my line, right?
Yeah, where's the demarcation? Let's be clear about that. And
Yeah.
let's not get to a point to where we're trying to decide that in the moment where we're trying to address whatever this infraction or this crisis is. Let's have those organizational readiness conversations on the front end to align around all those principles. That is where I feel like so many organizations fail to prepare themselves. And that's why right now, and what we're seeing, there is a lot of fumbling that's being done. People having to retract what they said they were going to do and what they said they were going to change, and it's feeling very messy and it's feeling very chaotic, right? And we're needing to come in and try to calm the storm. But that organizational readiness is key. And one of the things that I often will encourage my clients to think about is organizational readiness doesn't just happen when you're first deciding to do something of big significance of change. You need to continue to have those, conversations of, okay, let's assess where we are now. Do we still feel the same way? Let's evaluate the new information that's come forward. What are the implications to this to where we landed, a couple months ago or maybe a couple years ago? And that needs to happen right now as we think about navigating the political landscape of all that's impacting this body of work. Okay, this has been so rich. We are out of time, my friend. But I want to give you an opportunity to close this out in whatever way that feels appropriate. Maybe share something that I haven't asked you about that you're feeling a lot of energy for. And I want to thank you before I release you to do that, because I appreciate your time today. I appreciate your partnership, and I appreciate your leadership and how you're showing up to this work. And so thank you all for joining our podcast community today. We hope that if you found today's conversation valuable, that you will share it out with someone else. And so, Tommi, I want to turn it over to you for our last parting remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Nika. It was such a pleasure talking to you today and just engaging in conversation, intentional conversation, of course. Really centering the power of inclusion, and I think that that's really the essence, the central thrust, if you will, of kind of what I wanted to share with folks. And I believe inclusive leadership is our access to high performance. People wanting to run through a wall for you, right? Employees giving their discretionary efforts, people feeling like their contribution matters, effectively blending different types of people from different walks of life together. I think it's beautiful. And, it shows up in sport for us, and it shows up at work for us as well. And I think that if we stay committed to the principles of inclusive leadership, it's going to be a beautiful thing what we create together. So I just encourage us to stay the course.
Stay the course. You all heard it here. Thank you so much. Have a safe and wonderful weekend. And we hope to see you back next week for another episode of Intentional Conversations podcast. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.